Hello, everyone, and welcome to another stream. It is in the WSL day, so it is day 3, and we'll be talking about WSL2 and containers. So, my name is Sayam Pathak, and I'm a CNCF ambassador working as Director of Technical Evangelism at Civo, building the next gen cloud platform and Civo Kubernetes service. So I basically do streams with awesome people like you can see on the screen yourself. So if you are new to the channel, please care to subscribe because that's what keeps me going and it motivates me to do more. And with that, what we'll do is. We have already covered a couple of things, not couple, actually a lot of things, because Patrick, had tons and tons of demos in yesterday's stream, so which was really, really amazing. So what we'll do is we have covered Nuno covered in the first stream introduction to WSL and WSL2. So WSL Windows subsystem for Linux, he covered the introduction and he also covered the basic, the installation, the integration, how actually it works and why it is there, what problems it solve, what problems does the WSL1 and WSL2 solves. So all these things, they are very much taken care. They are very much taken care in the stream 1 if you go and see, and there are not a couple, actually 4 demos that he showed, interoperability, like the distributions, visual, and on all those things. And in yesterday's stream, we had Patrick, who demonstrated a lot of demos. Actually, we went into demo right from the beginning, and I think that will be the case today as well, because we have a lot to cover. So yesterday, Patrick covered like how to run the Windows, Windows commands from WSL, Windows scripts, and then how to run Linux commands using WSL. Then he showed us about some of the configurations which are there for the distributions, and which configurations are there for the actual WSL2, where you have the WSL2 and where you switch on and off like true and false for the some of the settings that are there, like debug, etc. And then he also talked about the registry editor, a place where you should only have a look and do not touch it. But it tells you, I mean, a lot of information, like is it WSL2? What are the flags, state, version? If it's a distribution downloaded from the store, if it's a imported distribution. So all these things, are there, which he told. Then he also talked about WSL path. Today, I am joined by Stuart, and we'll be talking he'll be talking about Docker desktop on Windows. Basically, we are talking about the WSL2 and containers. So Stuart will be giving, kind of talks and demos on the Docker desktop on Windows, how it works, then the WSL integration, some of the things he'll revisit and see how it can be done inside the containers, from inside the containers. So that would be pretty interesting. So today's session will also be kind of demo rich, and we will be having that as well. So thank you so much for joining in. We have Carlos, we have Nuno, Oshi is there, Viraj is there. So thank you so much for tuning in. And but today also we have kind of extra giveaways, actually. So one is the CNCF store coupon that we promised, like we will be giving away one CNCF store coupon every WSL stream. So that still holds true for today's stream as well. There are 2 extra things which I would like to thank Carlos for that. So we'll be having a Penguin license giveaway, and we'll be having a Raft license giveaway. So again, things to do is simple. You just have to the live tweet in form of thread what you are learning from this particular session, and then we will be choosing the winners. So Saloni will be monitoring the chat and seeing the Twitter thread, and she will be telling the winners in the end. Also, let me just grab the link which I prepared for the. Just a second, I'll go to my channel. So I created a playlist, out of the WSL days, so that it's kind of easy to share across with your friends as well. So this is the playlist link that I'm copying right now, which you're not able to see, but I'm doing that. So here is the playlist link. So make sure you have seen the. I mean, if if you are new here and you are unfamiliar with what WSL is, and you might have a question for that, because it is a possibility that you are joining only this stream and you didn't see the previous streams. So you can just check the playlist, and you can go through the first and the second stream, at least the first stream, to understand this stream, because Patrick was like kind of advanced one. So, but at least you should know about the integrations. You should know about what Nuno talked about, the complete introduction, and then this particular stream will be helpful for that. Now, what a live thread, as you told. So live thread is basically just keep tweeting on your and reply on your tweets, and you can tag Stuart, and you can see his Twitter handle on the screen. You can tag me, you can see my Twitter handle on the screen as well, so that we know like you are live tweeting. And once I go off this particular stream, I will be I usually see all the streams, and the presenters also, they see all the streams, and we feel very happy that something is getting done for the community. You are learning something which is really, really amazing. So with that, thank you so much for tuning in. Please keep sharing as well for this particular session, because it's important that more and more people watch it live to make it interactive and ask questions. And like we have Carlos, Nuno, all of the WSL experts are already there. So, and obviously Stuart is there, who will be introducing himself in a bit. So we have experts who are there to answer your queries. So now is the right time to ask any queries regarding WSL, regarding containers, because amazing people are there in the chat to help you out. So with that, thank you so much, Stuart, for tuning in today and giving us your time and explaining the WSL2 and containers. So please introduce yourself please introduce yourself to the community.
So I'm Stuart Leeks. I currently work as a software engineer at Microsoft in the commercial software engineering division, which is a group that works on joint engineering projects with customers and partners. So we kind of pick up projects that tend to be around 3 months long, and the technologies can vary quite a bit within that, which I think suits me quite well. It's quite fun, keeps you on your toes. So I spent a lot of time working with customers with various services in Azure. I've spent quite a bit of time working with Kubernetes and containers, amongst other technologies. For quite a while, I had a Windows machine as my main machine and a Linux machine that I kind of hopped onto to do a bunch of containers, Kubernetes type development work. When WSL2 in particular kind of came out, I found that actually I was hopping onto the Linux machine less and less, and the more I kind of understood WSL2, the more I found I could do with it, and the more I could do just on my single machine. And that kind of was the point that sparked the passion for WSL2. And last year, I actually was invited by Pact Publishing to write a book on WSL, which was a lot of fun. If anyone tells you never write a book for the money, believe them, and also expect to lose a chunk of your life to churning out words on a Word document. But it was a lot of fun. It was interesting, kind of looking at ways to explain various ideas that you have in your head, and then kind of figure out the gaps that you have in your knowledge in different areas as you try to kind of convey those pieces. So there are sections in that book that cover some more introductory pieces around Docker desktop, Kubernetes. I'm not planning to cover kind of the basics of what is a container here. I think that's kind of generally assumed for your audience. And I'm also not going to cover any of the Kubernetes stuff. Definitely tune in tomorrow to see Hayden covering those pieces. So kind of, I guess, just to recap from Nuno's session on Monday, with WSL2, there's a lightweight VM that gets spun up and runs an instance of the Linux kernel, and then on top of that, you can layer various Linux distributions. And when you think of VM, you tend to think of isolated, lockdown kind of virtual machines. And with WSL2, it's actually the exact opposite. They've put a lot of work into WSL2 to give you the best of both worlds. So you can reach out from Windows into Linux, and from Linux back into Windows, and bring tools and techniques from each scenario to play in the same space. which kind of gives you the power of the two environments combined into one, and that's kind of where the fun is for me. I really enjoy when different technologies kind of collide and seeing what you can do in that sort of space. So thinking about Docker on Windows, we've had Docker Desktop around for quite a while now, and the kind of classic approach with Docker Desktop has been that Docker Desktop would start and manage a traditional virtual machine for you. Inside that virtual machine, they'd run Linux with the Docker daemon installed and configured, and then they'd set up the Docker CLI on your Windows environment so that you can do Docker run, etc. from PowerShell or the command prompt. So kind of, that is workable, but gives you some challenges then, starting up a VM, you lose by default, in Docker Desktop 2 gig of your RAM, which if you're on a laptop tends to kind of bite you a little bit. And if you run out of RAM, then well, that's it. You've got to reconfigure the Docker Desktop VM memory size, restart it, and then restart your containers. Whereas with the lightweight VM that WSL2 runs in, it can dynamically grow and shrink the amount of memory that it uses. So it starts up quickly, it can dynamically grow and shrink the memory, and it has this really nice interoperability with Windows. So when Docker Desktop added I've lost my, no, there it is. I've got an update and I can recognize the icon. So when Docker Desktop added a WSL integration kind of option, that sounded really interesting. So when you enable the WSL integration, instead of running a separate VM just for Docker, what they actually do is run the Docker daemon inside of WSL2. So they actually set up a couple of distros to enable that, and we'll take a look at those in a second. But it means that WSL doesn't have a separate VM; it just integrates into the WSL2 VM. So you lose the need to kind of partition off a chunk of your RAM for a separate VM, and it all just sits inside the WSL2 environment. So when you come in here, you can pick which distros get that integration. And that basically means that those distros will have the Docker CLI configured for them automatically and have the connection to the Docker daemon all hooked up. So on my Windows side of things, I can do a Docker info, and we'll see down in here that we have the Microsoft WSL2 kernel. So this is running with the WSL2 backend, but I can also drop in here and I get the Docker CLI configured on my WSL2 side of things. So this is running in an Ubuntu distro here. So I get a consistent experience across all the distros that I've enabled this for. And I get a pretty light touch way of getting that configured and having that work. So that's really quite nice. And just to show, that is the same kernel version that you see when you come back from the Docker info. So it is definitely running inside of there. So one of the really cool things with WSL, as I mentioned, is the interop, and you saw a flavour of this in the sessions that both Nuno and Patrick did. And definitely, if you haven't watched those sessions, go back. They're a good watch. So we can do some things with different tools. So one of the tools that I found that I've used for an incredibly long time is clip.exe. And clip.exe lets you pipe some text into it, and it puts that onto your Windows clipboard. So at this point, I can now paste, and I pasted a command that doesn't exist, so it's not terribly useful. But from the command line, I can put things onto the Windows clipboard. So if I've got a command that I'm running where it's going to take a bunch of information and give me some IDs that I'm going to need to paste into an email to someone or something like that, clip.exe is just one of those kind of really nice little tools to have in your toolkit for getting information from a terminal onto the Windows clipboard to use and consume in other applications. Now, we don't need to put the .exe because that kind of gets implied on Windows, but on Linux we do, but I've aliased it, which I forgot I'd set up. But we can call clip.exe, and that is picking up the Windows binary because it's in the path. So we don't need to specify the path. But if you have things that aren't in the path, you can access those as you saw through the Mount C in the earlier sessions. So from the WSL side of things, I can put in. Let's do a different message, just so you know that I'm not messing with you. And hello Siam isn't installed, but it's trying to make sense of it. It's just install hello. So from the WSL lightweight VM, I'm able to run echo and pipe that into clip.exe. So I'm running something on Bash in Linux, so running in WSL2, and I take the output of a command and I can pipe that into the standard in for a Windows binary. So clip.exe gets run and gets passed the output from whatever the rest of the pipe had processed. So whether that's output from the GitHub CLI, the Azure CLI, Kube Control, the Docker CLI, whatever, you can take all those pieces, pipe them through, slice and dice them, and then just drop them onto your Windows clipboard and run with them from there. So that's all cool. And then we can bring these two pieces together. So if I take a little look here, I have customized things a little bit. So there are some utilities that will call out to things like Xclip or Xcel to do clipboard access. So I actually have an Xclip. Actually, you know what? I should probably just say don't put a new line, and then it won't keep throwing errors out. But I can pass that into Xclip, and then I can paste that back. So that doesn't necessarily immediately jar because I'm staying within a WSL terminal, but I'm using Control V, which is pasting from the Windows clipboard in Windows terminal. And passing something back in. So I've actually set up an Xclip alias to work there, and that's going to be the basis for kind of taking this a step further. So if we have a little look, in fact, let's load up the demo project that we've got here. So I've got this Xclip script, and that just takes whatever the input is. So we read from standard in, and then pipes that into clip.exe. So it's basically giving us a script way of doing what we had previously. And that just gives us a nice little kind of anchor point where we can take things a little bit further. One thing to call out kind of at this point is I'm running code in the insiders builder VS Code, so you could do code. If I could type, I could do code dot and you'd run the stable version. The insiders just is to pick up the insiders build. This has picked up the current directory from WSL. So in here, I'm in the Siam folder that I've got in here, which is what's been picked up. And you notice this little bit down in the bottom left saying WSL Ubuntu. This is indicating that VS Code is running in the remote WSL kind of mode of pieces. So what that really means is, if we take a little look, let me paste. There we go. So VS Code has this notion of remote workspaces. So the user interface is running in Windows. So that's this local OS here. So you see your VS Code window and any kind of server side, any UI side extensions. And then the logical separation that splits here factors out access to the source code, running with terminals, debuggers, language services, and pieces like that, so that this portion can run independently of the UI. So In the case that we're looking at here, that remote portion is running in WSL. So if I have any language services, any debuggers, those will all be running as processes in the Linux side of the house. So you get kind of full compatibility. So if you've got Python scripts you're working on, and you're using Python modules that don't have Windows counterparts or anything like that, then that's no longer an issue. Same for any Node modules, anything like that. So once we've started that from here, we've actually got the separate portions split between Windows and the WSL side. And we'll come back to kind of the remote capabilities in VS Code in a little while. So let's take a look in the clip directory in here. So we can do some other cool stuff. So we saw the script that was there, and this Xclip script is basically something that I have installed in my Bash profile, but it's using the same script that I just showed you in VS Code. But we could do some kind of fun things to then look at taking this inside of a container. So if I start up a container here, we can see that I've got the Xclip script and I've got a Docker file. So we can start to mess around. You can see my Windows heritage when I try and type CLS in a container. I have CLS aliased most places so that muscle memory doesn't have to change and I stay productive. But inside of random containers, it doesn't do me any favors. So on this side of things, if we do a ping, one of the other things that Docker Desktop sets up for us is a DNS pointer. So we can ping host.docker.internal, and that is routing to this address here. Let's stop that, which is actually an address on my local machine. So that's going to point back to my host machine. So we've got a DNS name that allows us to kind of hook back and find a way to try and talk back to the host. So what we want to do is be able to have clipboard access inside the container that will route back through to the Windows clipboard, so that if we're working with utilities in the container, we can pipe the output from them, just like we did in the WSL scenario. So I'm going to keep it set up like this. So I'll keep WSL on the left and I'll keep the container on the right, just to keep it kind of easier for following along. So on the left-hand side, I am going to run SOCAT. So SOCAT was one of those utilities that when I first came across it, my eyes lit up. I'm going to use SOCAT here to listen on a TCP port. So that's this TCP listen. So I'm going to be listening on port 8221. Other ports are available. And then I'm going to just say listen on all adapters. And then when you get a request in, create a call out to clip.exe. Now, clip.exe is going to get the input that is received on that TCP socket piped into it. So you can probably start to see where this is going. We're going to have a listener on this side of the house, so running in WSL, that is going to take TCP requests, accept the socket, and then relay anything that comes over that socket to clip.exe, which will then put it onto the clipboard. So from here, I can paste the command here. So we're going to echo this hello from a container, and we're going to pipe that into SOCAT. And this time we're going to say to SOCAT, take whatever's coming in standard in and redirect that to host.docker internal on port 8221. So now that I've done that, if I let's bring up something separate, so it really feels like we're not in. There we go. So if I paste from the Windows clipboard, hello from a container has been redirected from inside a container. So we set that hello from a container inside the container here on the right hand side. We directed that with SOCAT over TCP to our SOCAT listener here, which is then going to pipe each set of text that it gets to clip.exe, which puts it onto the Windows clipboard. So you can start to kind of go, well, I like breaking down the barriers between Linux and Windows that WSL has done. How do I get some of that goodness inside of containers when I'm working with them? So that kind of gives a bit of fun for some of the things that you can do with that. And then it's sort of, this is all well and good setting up this command. This isn't necessarily a command that will trip off your fingertips when you're looking to type it. So if this is something you want to start adding, then the first thing you want to do is on the WSL side, have this be something that's set up and just runs by default for you. And I'm not going to go through that in tremendous detail, but if you are interested, let me paste this link. I can't seem to put it as a comment, so I'm just going to paste it in the private chat to you, Sam.
Yep,
so,
hey.
So in here you can see the commands that we've just been running and setting all of that up. So what we can do is have something like this that you can put in your bash profile. So this can check to make sure that we don't start multiple listeners. So if you start multiple terminals in your distro, you only get the one listener. And then we can make sure that it's durable. So here we're using setsid to reparent the process that runs so that it doesn't die just when your terminal dies. So having said we're only going to have one, let's not lose that if we happen to kill the first terminal we create that had set it up. So you can take a snippet like that, and then you can put that in your bash profile or your bash RC or the equivalent files for other shells. And then at that point, you've got the left-hand side portion of this automated, so you'll automatically have that listener created. On the right-hand side, again, pipe into SOCAT is potentially not the most obvious thing to be thinking about doing. But in here we have another xclip.sh, so we can take the same approach that we saw in WSL where we're taking standard in and piping it to clip.exe and instead pipe it to that SOCAT command that we just had. So if we were to alias that, then we can get back to a command that looks much more like a traditional command that you'd use to interact with a clipboard from Linux, but have that work in that tunneled through from a container back to Windows manner that we just did in a more manual sense. So then the question is, well, how do you get this xclip script into your container when you're working with it? And at that point, I guess the question that we really want to ask is, well, when do you want to do this? When might you want to do this? And for me, the point at which I wanted to be able to do this was working with Visual Studio Code remote containers. So we looked a moment ago at this diagram where we saw the Windows UI and then WSL having the remote processes that give you access to your source code, your terminals, and debuggers, etc. There's also remote containers. So with remote containers, you swap out that right-hand side that was WSL previously for a container. So you can have a Docker file that describes the development environment you want to work in, all the tools you want. And then Visual Studio Code will build an image from that, run that up, and then connect in and inject a server process so that you get all of these pieces running inside the container. There's a number of scenarios where this is quite compelling, I think, in a team environment where you want to have a common set of tools that everyone's using so that your scripts all work consistently. Having the set of tools described kind of in a way that is programmatically then applied is really nice. So you go from having the README in the root of your repo that's got an out-of-date, incomplete list of tools you need to go off and install that points to the wrong versions because some people have updated different versions, to something that actually is going to enforce that those tools are installed because you've got those in your Docker file. So that's one scenario. Another is kind of then when you look at the onboarding for new team members, it's well, get Docker, get VS Code, clone this, open it, grab a cup of coffee while it builds the Docker image the first time, and then you're up and running. You've got all the tools. You can go get started. And actually, recently, my team have found that reusing this Docker file that you use for your dev container with VS Code as part of your CI pipeline offers a lot of benefits as well, because you don't find those scenarios where you've added a new tool or changed the tool version and you forgot to update your CI pipeline. Well, if you're working on the same Docker file between local development and CI, then all of those pieces kind of go away as well. And I've got a starter project that I've been working on to try and make that a little bit simpler to use for GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps pipelines. But that's kind of the spot. So when you've got this environment where you've described things in a Docker file, you've got a few other little dials that you can tweak with VS Code from dev containers. There's a dev container.json, and that lets you configure things like build arguments and run arguments. So if when you're familiar with Docker build and Docker run, you can actually override some of the properties that VS Code sets when it's executing those commands. You can also configure extensions that you want pre-installed. So if you're working on a project in Go, you might want to have the Go tooling installed, so the Go extension of VS Code, and I tend to have some extra settings in there just to fine-tune how the Delve debugger works and things like that, just so that someone coming into the project has a really nice experience, and you can view long strings in the debugger, etc. And then the last part is with dev containers. When it builds your container image and then starts it up, you can actually say, go grab my dot files and install those. So I've got a dot files repo up on GitHub, and I've just configured VS Code so that anytime I'm building and working in a project with the dev containers extension, it will build the dev container as is described in the project's repo, but it'll then go and grab my dot files and run the install script from that. And I mentioned earlier my muscle memory around CLS versus clear. Well, guess what one of the aliases that's in my dot files, which means I can now pick up a dev container from any project, get my dot files applied, and there's an alias in there so that I can type CLS and it will translate that to clear for me. So any of the bits that aren't necessarily core piece of the project, but the things that make my life easier, I can incorporate in those. So those dot files give us a really nice place to drop in things like the clipboard access script. So this xclip script and the alias, I basically have that in my dot files that gets pulled in for dev containers. So when I'm in that containerized development environment, I know that I can drop into a terminal in VS Code from a dev container, and I'll pick up the ability to run commands in the terminal, pipe them to xclip, and have those things land on my Windows clipboard, just as if I was in PowerShell or Bash on WSL. And it just helps bring all those environments to a much more consistent manner and keep me productive regardless of which one I'm in. I don't have to do as much mental context switching of, am I running on Windows straight on WSL or in a container for my development? I can get a really nice kind of consistent experience across all of those. So if we take a little look back, there was a little prompt that came up here that I dismissed, but we can get that back and say reopen in a container. So down at the bottom here, this currently says WSL. I've got a .dev container folder in here, which is where the Docker file lives for the remote containers. And now this is opening up the remote container. So it's going through, checking that the image is up to date. And then it will go through that process of installing any extensions that have been described in the dev container JSON file, installing my dot files, and then when this starts up, it's the perils of working with the insider's build of code is that suddenly you get an updated version of the server that needs to be downloaded. But here we go. So we're now seeing dev container rather than WSL down on this bottom left-hand side. And you've got options to reopen that same folder in different contexts. So I can go back to WSL nice and easily if I want to. All of this code is now sitting mounted inside of the container. So if I drop into the integrated terminal here, you'll notice that I'm now in /workspaces SIAM. So it's mounted the source code that I had in WSL under the /workspaces root in inside of the container. And I can type CLS because it's pulled in my dot files, and I have that. I can echo hello let's do Excel because I have that one installed as well, and hello works, and I can paste that back. So whenever I pick up any of these remote container definitions, my dot files can layer on those consistent experiences that I want to have as part of my workflow. And it all kind of layers up from the WSL to Windows interop as the kind of the base layer, and then this kind of tunnel over TCP and put in the shim utilities as scripts that we saw, and we kind of manually implemented in this split terminal here. So the dot files with the dev containers experience just gives you a way to automate that and kind of polish it, but fundamentally it's doing exactly what we just did manually in the terminal in these two panes. Cool. That's probably a good time to breathe and just check back with you, Sam, see if there's any questions or anything like that have come up in the chat.
Nope, no questions as such, but people really did appreciate the demo, to be honest, and a lot of nice tweets as well for the same. So, and even you can see VS Code modules for WSL and containers connectivity are so dope. And yep, I think this one as well, like the output redirection, pipe, socket connectivity, containers, you can do all in WSL2. So, and I have also given your blog link. I think this is explaining in detail what all setup you have to do, like running the container and all that stuff as well. So it would be helpful for the people who are watching now, as well as later, if you want to do it on your own step by step. So I think that would help a lot. Yep, I think people are liking it.
So the that technique of kind of using SOCAT to tunnel is very cool, and there's actually another scenario which is purely a WSL2 scenario where I've used SOCAT, and that is for SSH keys. So I have my machine set up with the OpenSSH server running on Windows. So I register my SSH keys on Windows, and then I use SOCAT inside of WSL to forward SSH key requests from WSL2 into Windows. And the interesting bit there is that the SSH server in Windows expects you to connect with name pipes, and the SSH key lookup in WSL expects to use Unix sockets. Now, John Starks has written a utility called npipe relay, so name pipe relay. So you can actually combine, like we did here with SOCAT and Clip, you can actually combine SOCAT and npipe relay so that you set up a listener for SSH key requests in WSL that forwards anything it receives on the Unix socket in WSL to the name pipe relay, which forwards it on to the named pipe so that it can be accessed. The net effect is you only configure your SSH keys once and you have them available everywhere. There is actually the blog post I've got walking through. Here we go. Yeah, so this one uses a fairly familiar kind of pattern in here. So here we're doing a SOCAT with a Unix listen instead of TCP. And then the exec here is using this npipe relay command to say, forward anything that you receive from SOCAT onto this OpenSSH SSH agent named pipe. So you translate Unix sockets to named pipes and cross the Linux to Windows boundary as you do it, which is a pretty cool thing to be able to do. And then there's a very similar kind of piece in here for using setsid, checking that we don't have it running already. So kind of you can probably spot the patterns coming through between this and the clipboard access that we just had set up. But a really cool thing here is if you have this SSH auth sock set up, then when VS Code dev containers starts up, it will look and check and see if the host has SSH auth sock exported. It will automatically set up forwarding from inside the dev container to the host. So with this setup here, I can be inside of the dev container, and VS Code will then forward any key requests from inside the dev container to the host, and then the forwarding that's set up here forwards them from the WSL host onto my Windows SSH key agent. So even inside of a dev container, I can still use SSH key auth to SSH to machines or auth to repos, which is a very cool feature that comes through from there. Another kind of thinking about kind of nice features that kick in here is a friend and a colleague sent me a really handy script for working with the GitHub CLI. So the GitHub CLI gives you a bunch of, in fact, let's flick it back over to here where we've got a bit more space. A bunch of commands for working with repos, PRs, workflows, and all those kind of pieces. So I find it a really nice way to create a PR. So tell you what, let's do git checkout demo time. Cool. So we've got a little branch here, so I can do GitHub PR create. And I can go and specify a bunch of other arguments, but if I skip those, then the GitHub CLI detects that I've got an interactive terminal here and lets me kind of pick which Git remote I want to push to for creating the PR. So I'll come in here and do that. It's asking me what the title is, but it's giving a nice default here. You can see hello Cyan because that was the commit message from the last commit that was there. So we can go through with that. Do I want to change the body of it? I could launch Nano, which is my sort of default editor, but I'm just going to leave that for now. And then I'm going to say go create that PR. So that has gone through and done that. And then my colleague sent me this really nice GitHub run script. So there's run command under the GitHub CLI, but this GitHub run script takes it kind of a step further and automatically, there we go, let's go for this one, automatically figures out what branch you're on and then passes that branch ID into the GitHub run watch to say what's happening. So if we do that before it's already gone through. And then it calls notify send. Now, if you can see down in the bottom right here, I've actually got a little Windows notification that's come up. And kind of, it's piping that into notify send, which is a standard Linux way of popping up toast notifications. But by default does you no favors in WSL. So kind of having seen this script and commented out the notify send bit and used it a few times, I went, actually, I really want the notify send behavior because CI builds take more than sort of the 10 seconds of my capability to maintain an interruption. So what normally happens is I kick off a CI build and then I go and look at my messages that have come in, check my email, whatever, and then suddenly you're off on a totally different task. And having a notification that pops up to go, hey, your build succeeded, your build failed, is kind of a really nice way to just kind of bring yourself back and stay on task. So for this, this post takes you through. In fact, let me pop a link in there. This takes you through a similar approach that we've seen for the clipboard and the SSH key kind of integration. And after a bit of a search, I found a nice Go-based library for doing toast notifications on Windows. and I created a wrapper around that, which has broadly compatible arguments with the notify send command. So I have WSL notify send, and if I run that, you can see we've got a bunch of arguments that we can pass in here. So I can just leave it and pass in a message. So if I say hello again, then we get hello again popping up in the bottom right. And with things like the app ID and the category, we can control what the headings are on the different levels of the message there. So the notify send. In fact, let's just do that. This actually is an alias I've set up, and I don't know if you can see if I zoom in there. The hello again has Ubuntu 18.04 at the top, and 18.04 is the WSL distro that I'm in. So I've actually set up my alias for notify send to automatically pick up which distro I'm in. And then that's, again, something that's set up in my dot files so that it's nice and easy to configure across different distros that I have and different machines as I set them up. So that notify send lets me take the script that I originally got sent here and have it just work. So if I have any other scripts that use the notify send command, then those all just kind of slot in nicely in my my WSL distro. And then I wasn't content with that. And you may notice if I bring up my notifications here. So let's have a quick zoom in on this bit. I'm going to zoom in. There we go. So this top one is the one that we just set up with the notify send, which is this plain text. This bottom one is the one that came up when I used my my GitHub run alias that I actually have set up, and that has this open browser piece here, which lets me automatically open the browser to drop into the exact build that has just completed. So if there's an error, the first thing I probably want to go and do is go and look at that and click through to try and see where it is. So having an easy way to get my attention back and then go and dig into whatever I've broken is kind of really helpful. So for that, there's a this will test my blog name. Oh, I did. Look at that. So part 2 of this takes you through looking at a modified version of that uses the toast exe directly. So with the toast exe, you can actually put some actions. So you can have some actions in here that have URLs associated with them. So the GitHub run script kind of got updated a little bit so that you can figure out what the URL is for the GitHub workflow that just completed and put that with an open in browser link. And then having that working, as you just saw in here, so directly in WSL is nice. But if I'm working inside a container and I've got the GitHub CLI installed there and that's all using the auth, then it'd be really kind of nice if I could run the same command in here and have that also pop up a Windows notification. So that's kind of the techniques that we've just been through. Hopefully by now you've realised that these techniques can kind of be applied and layered. It's got exactly the same thing in that my dot files have a script that uses SOCAT to tunnel back to the host to do the notifications, but then from within a container, I've got the clipboard access. I've got toast notifications that can work. I can do notify send. All of those pieces just kind of build one on top of the other. And even inside of a dev container with all the benefits that brings, I still get that sense that I'm on the actual machine, and I can still harness the power of WSL and Windows. So it's kind of the mindset is, well, this bridge between these two different worlds of Windows and Linux, let's also just extend that bridge and have another leg of the bridge that takes us into the dev container world that we're using, and just make that feel as natural a fit into the system that I'm using as the WSL integration does. So that's kind of the point I wanted to reach in the demos. So I guess. I'll open it up for any comments, any questions, and then
Yep. So I have pasted all the amazing links. I think I wrote in the comment as well, like stuartleaks.com itself is having gold content. So probably you should, visit all the posts over there because I have posted, I think, 4 to 5 links already. So you can see, like, all the fun that Stuart has been doing with WSL containers and stuff. So really nice demos, actually. Especially starting with the Xclip one, the output redirects, VS Code, sockets, how you can tie or how you can use the power of WSL and Linux and extend it to the containers as well, just as you said, like extending the bridge to use the same power within a container. So you can see, like, the dev container is running this VS Code, and you can use the same commands, the notify, send hello, and it will also pop up a message for you, and then extending that with the GitHub notifications that will be taking you directly into the browser, into the builds that has been failing. So I think that's pretty cool, and even extending that with your Toast and other utilities. So basically, using the WSL Linux power and within the container as well. So it's pretty interesting and pretty powerful. You can see that for yourself, like how you can utilize the power. And Docker Desktop obviously is helping in a very big manner over here. So we have Docker Desktop. It has like WSL support for you to do all the tasks that Stuart has just shown. So check out all the links that have been there in the chat, and also I
one
will
thing that I
post
realized
that.
I meant to show that I didn't, sorry to interrupt, is just the the Docker file. Just show this really no great magic. This Docker file comes down and then has some pieces to install. So this is going to install the GitHub CLI, install the Azure CLI, some other utilities. Actually, this one is really nice. So this sets up customizing where your bash history gets saved. So this is in the Docker file, and I mentioned the devcontainer.json. So in the devcontainer.json, this is setting up a volume mount. So this volume mount happens to be the location that we just configured the bash history to be saved at, which means that your bash history gets preserved across different instances of this container. So if you change the Docker file and rebuild, you keep all your bash history. But not only that, your bash history is scoped to that volume. So you can have the volumes with different names that your bash history is scoped to a particular project, which if you end up hopping between a couple of different projects is really, really powerful. Because you come back to a project after a couple of weeks of working on something else, and all of the commands that you had for building running are there in the bash history in that dev container, and that's incredibly powerful.
Yep, that is
Another
really
mount here is just mounting my host GitHub config into the GitHub config location in the folder, which again, in terms of that seamlessness, means that I don't have to sign in with the GitHub CLI again inside a new dev container that's configured this way. I just pick up the host authentication for GitHub CLI. So yeah, a few bits you can kind of set in there that just really streamline the experience. But yeah, I mean, if you know a Docker file, you know how to define what the dev container should look like, and there's a few little bits you can configure inside of this JSON file just to tune the experience a little bit further.
awesome. That looks really cool. Also, can you show, like you already have shown, but like, can you show in the zoomed version of the Docker settings WSL, the
Yes,
integration that we showed in
you're
the
right.
beginning? Can you
I
do
did
that?
forget to zoom in on that. Yeah, absolutely correct. So in here under resources WSL integration, I've got this configured to set up the main distros that I kind of want to use Docker from.
Awesome. So I think that's pretty cool, and I mean, the amazing set of demos again, once again. So I thought, like, Patrick was doing all demos, and we might see something different. But Stuart also came with a lot of demos to explain things very clearly and how it actually works, how you can play around with it, and also some of the the links that are there in detail for you to try out. So, which is amazing. So Carlos asks one question: these dev containers have any relation with the dev environments that are in preview in Docker Desktop?
There are similarities. I've yet to play properly with the dev environments in Docker Desktop, but my understanding from kind of the sessions and the reading I've done around is they're targeting sort of different usage scenarios for the two.
Cool. Same idea, different technologies. Yep. So Luno is saying like it's the same idea, different technologies.
Yeah, so there are definitely some differences in the scenarios where you might use one or the other. The packaging up, the state you have on disk that's not yet been committed to Git, and putting that in a volume that gets bundled up and shared with someone else who can then unfurl it and load it up is something that the Docker Desktop dev environments, that's a bit of a mouthful, has as a kind of a core capability that's a different scenario from the VS Code dev.
Awesome. So what we'll do is, I think we can do the giveaway as well right now, because I have seen like already. Okay, let's take one more question from Suman. Does the update of Docker release impact the WSL2 libraries in any way, or we need to update them as well?
So I'm assuming that's kind of the Docker CLI, etc., that you use from WSL2. If I've misunderstood the question, then do elaborate. But yeah, all of the Docker CLI gets managed for you by the Docker Desktop from the WSL environment. So when you update that all gets updated.
Cool. So with that, we have three folks who have been tweeting really, really, really amazingly. So I'm just typing their names in the chat. Uh, So thank you so much, first of all, for live tweeting all the things, which is really, really good. And we have been, I'm seeing the amazing set of tweets and threads of tweet, which are going on. So I think that's really, really amazing. And with that, the three folks who have, won today are, I'll tell like who has won what, but they are Rohit, Viraj, and Saloni Nair. So these three folks have created a lot of Twitter threads, and that is really good. And I'll post the link in the chat as well. Sorry, the names in the chat. Like Rohit has won the CSCF coupon, Saloni the Penguin license, and Viraj is the Raft license. So the Raft and the Penguin license will be given by Carlos, and the CNCF coupon will be given by me. So please reach out to me in the chat. Also, like we can maybe do something like something interesting. So whosoever I just got a message from Carlos, like we can, in the Penguin stream, we'll be having much more giveaways with the licenses. That would be amazing. So Abhay, you can go through the session. It is recorded. So we have like recorded all the sessions. So there's a playlist for the WSL day. So this session was on WSL2 and containers. So that is that is the scene for this particular session. So with that, I'll share my screen for a split second, and we'll do the thing that we always do, which is we'll take mark the third one. So finally successfully completing the WSL days day 3, where we have discussed WSL2 and containers. So it's pretty interesting. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Nuno and Carlos, for always answering all the questions, and also keeping the stream engaged. And thank you to all the community members who have joined. They learn so much and they share what they have learned in form of Twitter threads. I'm sure, like, when Stuart sees them, after the stream, he'll be really happy to see what all things they have learned from the stream. So it's very cool. And with that, thank you so much, Stuart, for giving your time and and spending 1 hour with us and telling us about WSL, its integrations with containers, how powerful they are. So it's yeah, as agreed by Nuno, it's crazy good, the things that you have brought to the stage. So thank you so much for that. With that, we'll see you tomorrow, because we have another stream tomorrow, which is on WSL2 and K3S. So it's again by Hayden and another awesome member in the WSL community. So we'll be having a lot of fun tomorrow as well. So stay tuned with the WSL days, and always be here. And also big thanks to Carlos for the Penguin licenses and the Raft licenses. Thank you so much for that as well. With that,
Thank you very much.
thank you so much, all. Stuart, you want to say thank you or anything, last words to the community?
Thank you for inviting me on. Thanks to Nuno, Carlos, Patrick, Hayden. They're an amazing bunch of folks to be in a lineup with. And yeah, I hope this has kind of given a taste of both the interop with WSL and Windows, and also kind of what you can do with the containers on top of that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a nice day. Bye.